Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to the deep dive. We take source material, could be articles, notes, research, and really boil it down, help you get the core insights fast.
And today we're stepping into something, well, pretty fascinating and definitely unconventional.
We have a transcript here. It's from a regression hypnosis session.
Right. And the method used, as described in the source, is presented as a kind of telepathic or clairvoyant investigation done under hypnosis.
Exactly. And our focus today is purely on what's inside this transcript about Pope Francis and the future of the Catholic Church. It's all centered around a perceived date, April 27th, 2025.
And just to be really clear about our mission here, we're exploring the details and perspectives only from this specific transcript.
That's it. We're just reporting what the source material says. We're not adding anything else, no outside info, no trying to verify or validate the claims.
We're simply digging into the text we've been given.
Okay, so let's jump right in. What does this source say about Pope Francis's state and the perceived here and now of that session, April 27th, 2025?
Well, the description is pretty striking. It perceives him as being located somewhere between different dimensions.
Between dimensions.
Yeah, like navigating between different plans or floors is how it's put, almost like different levels of reality. And it notes something is not stabilized about his state.
Good.
He's seen as being carried by a kind of wave, moving between these dimensions.
Carried by a wave. Wow. That definitely sets a unique tone right away. And the source gets specific too, doesn't it? About perceived DNA.
It does. It ventures right into DNA composition. It states his perceived DNA is 90 to 93% human, and the remaining 7% as reptilian.
Reptilian. Okay, that's specific.
It is, and within this perceived space, this sort of multidimensional state, it also describes him as being followed and oriented
Followed by what or who?
by what the source calls powerful energies and consciousnesses.
Okay.
When asked to identify them, the source mentions an Egyptian-like god figure described with a wolf-like head.
Well, wolf-headed god?
Yeah. And another consciousness that's perceived as being like artificial intelligence. Very cold. Not much emotion, just focused on a task.
So the picture the source paints is less of an independent leader and more like someone being directed.
Exactly. That's the sense you get. The source describes the role of these entities as moving him around, creating fluid paths for him to follow.
Like a shepherd.
Yeah, the transcript uses that word, shepherd, making sure he goes where they direct him. He's perceived less as a pope in the usual sense, and more like a standard bearer or even a trophy for these energies.
Does the source say if he's aware of this? Of being guided or moved?
It suggests he's partly conscious of these surrounding energies, yeah. But the description implies he's also surprised by the turmoil, like he feels he's not going where he thought he'd go.
And wasn't there something about pacts or contracts?
Yes, that's woven in there, the idea of pacts or contracts made in consciousness with these orienting entities.
Okay, so according to this source, what was the deal? What was exchanged?
According to the transcript, what he offered was delivering messages to the population, offering possibilities, and, importantly, staying silent when it was necessary to be silent.
And in return?
In return, the source perceives he was assured his pontificate would continue, and guaranteed this possibility of quasi-permanent power.
Quasi-permanent power. Interesting phrasing. And grief. You mentioned grief playing a role.
Yeah, a brief mention. The source perceives that grief coming from people on Earth acts like a tether. It keeps him connected to physical reality and actually helps these entities guide his path, according to this view.
Another layer in this complex picture the source is painting.
Exactly. A perceived tether in this multidimensional landscape.
So that gives us a sense of his perceived state. Now, the source also talks about his passing.
Yeah.
And this is where that space-time discrepancy comes in, right?
Right. This is a really key and kind of complex detail in the transcript. It perceives a discrepancy around the date of physical death. When the source is asked to observe a calendar in the room at the perceived moment of physical death, the date seen is April 18th.
Okay.
But multiple years appear at the same time. 2025, 2032, and even 2017 are all perceived simultaneously on this calendar.
Multiple years at once. Wow. What about the scene itself? What does the source describe seeing at that moment?
It describes a room, not many physical people there, but many more metaphysical beings.
Metaphysical beings.
Yeah, including other disincarnated personalities. Pope John Paul II is specifically mentioned as being among them.
And what are they doing?
They're perceived as grabbing him. That's the word used.
Grabbing him. And the death itself. It's described unusually, too, isn't it?
Very unusually, not as a single event. The source describes it as his energy bodies die one after another.
Energy bodies.
Yeah. The image used in the transcript is like small candle flames extinguishing, but sequentially, one after another.
Which one goes first, according to this?
The mental body is perceived as extinguishing first, and the sexual body is perceived as the last one functioning. And potentially, this is what maintains the physical body for a while.
So wait. According to this source, the physical body might still be functioning, even as these energy bodies are shutting down in sequence.
That's the perception described, yes. And the source attributes this whole thing, the time discrepancy, the sequential energy body death, to something it calls programming.
Programming. What's the perceived purpose of that? Why program something like this?
The source states the purpose is to ensure the impact of his death, or his departure, has a powerful impact on all dimensions and all times.
It's a powerful impact.
Yeah, it's about creating what it calls sufficient symbolic, energetic, and vibratory deflagration. Basically, a huge energetic release or reaction.
And the goal of that release.
To maintain the mass of believers, according to the source.
And how does this programming affect the physical body across those different perceived timelines?
Well, the transcript describes this mechanism where, as one of these perceived energy bodies disappears in a specific spacetime,
Okay.
corresponding physical organs or functions are perceived to stop working across those different spacetimes until the physical body just can't be maintained anymore.
So it's like a ripple effect, but manifesting physically based on energetic states across multiple perceived realities.
That's a good way to put it, yeah. That's the concept described.
And is this kind of complex temporal programming seen as unique to the Pope figure in the source?
No, actually. The source notes it's perceived as being used for other personalities with a global impact as well.
For what purpose?
Specifically, the source says to modify or control collective consciousness.
Wow. Okay. That's a lot to take in. Moving from the moment of passing to the public announcement, the source sees the timing of that announcement as important too.
Yes, very much so. The perceived announcement date, April 21st, 2025, which was Resurrection Day that year, is seen as highly strategic.
Strategic how?
It's perceived as having a hidden or occult meaning. The source views it explicitly as related to information manipulation, designed to create symbolic power, and a significant vibratory aspect. Something meant to touch a maximum of people energetically.
So this source perceives a specific intended energetic impact happening on Earth when this announcement is made.
According to the transcript, yes. A supplementary layer forms around the Earth. It's described as a vibratory layer.
A vibratory layer around the Earth. And what's the perceived purpose of that? What does it do?
It's seen as a kind of protection, or maybe an inhibition. The source uses both terms. It's meant to contain the vibratory information of his death within a defined spacetime.
Contain it. Why?
To make it more impactful, according to this source. To prevent the energy from sort of diluting across other dimensions or plans, which, in this view, would lessen its power and its intended effect.
Okay, so what's the perceived impact then of this event, this layer, on baptized practitioners and maybe the world more broadly, as described in the source, of course?
It's perceived as having a significant vibratory impact, particularly on believers. It's described as mobilizing the mental energies of all believers.
Mobilizing them how?
It acts as a kind of perceived reminder, like, hey, you're there, don't forget, we are here too. Essentially, the source frames it as a way to keep them vibrationally at our will.
Keep them vibrationally at will.
Yeah.
Okay, and what about the rest of the world? Non-believers or people of other faiths?
Well, for those who give power to a dogma, that's the phrasing, meaning anyone who offers their energy or sense of destiny to any structured belief system, this vibratory layer is perceived to create a kind of adhesion.
Adhesion.
Yeah. A reminder, the source suggests that they are not sovereign. For others, though, the source notes it can spark resistance. It acts like a mirror to oneself, affirming individual consciousness, a desire not to be deceived or illusioned. Although it does note fewer people are perceived in that second category.
But the source does clarify this impact isn't just about the ritual of baptism itself, right?
Right, exactly. It clarifies the perceived impact is related more to the belief or the programming that each person makes based on their adherence to a dogma, not the act of baptism per se.
So it could affect non-Catholics too.
Yes, the source notes it affects non-Catholics who adhere strongly to other dogmas, though maybe less strongly if their core belief isn't tied specifically to that Catholic dogma, you know.
Got it. Okay, shifting gears a bit. The source also touches on prophecies about the church's future,
Mhm.
specifically that one about the last pope leading to great trouble, maybe the fall of Rome, the end of the papacy. What's the perceived reaction to that prophecy in this source's view?
The source describes much agitation and actual fear among what it calls religious decision makers, fear that this prophecy could really happen.
And that fear leads to,
According to the transcript, it leads to a major effort to maintain everything that has been built for a long time to hold the structure together.
and what's the underlying reason for that fear as the source perceives it?
Loss of power. Plain and simple, according to the source. Loss of power.
And does it connect this to existing problems?
Yes, it connects this fear directly to perceived existing failings or cracks already present in the church system.
Cracks related to what?
Things like political power, pedocriminality, finance and money, various systems of influence, and also just rigid belief systems.
What does the source perceive as having created those cracks in the first place?
It describes them interestingly as vibratory pockets of consciousness, essentially energy from people on Earth, their thoughts, their awareness accumulating over time and becoming visible within the system.
Vibratory pockets of consciousness.
Yeah.
And what keeps them going or makes them grow in this perceived reality?
The source says simply looking at them, having consciousness of them makes them grow. Awareness itself feeds them.
So public awareness of these issues actually makes the cracks bigger in this view.
That's the perception. And the Pope's perceived death isn't seen as having contributed to those cracks yet, but the source says religious leaders are paying very close attention to prevent it from doing so.
So consciousness is seen as this force creating and widening these internal fragilities. Fascinating. What about the bigger picture? The geopolitical situation after Pope Francis, according to this source's perception.
The perception is of many stakes, a lot of maneuvering, many discussions happening globally about the Catholic Church's place and influence.
Like a chess game?
Exactly. The source uses that image. Leaders positioning themselves like in a big chess game. They're perceived as being very conscious of the church's real impact on populations.
But also worried.
Yes, worried it might not be powerful enough to maintain the masses anymore. The source says a lot is being done globally and on other levels, apparently, to keep the whole house of cards from collapsing.
But it's fragile.
Very fragile is the perception. Though immediate big changes aren't seen right away, that's attributed to heavy energies being at play.
Heavy energies holding things in place. For now, what about that other big prophecy? Malachi's. The one about Petrus Romanus, Peter the Roman, destruction of the city of seven hills, final judgment. What does the source see when it looks at that?
You know, it's interesting. The source describes that prophecy, when viewed through this specific lens, as seeming flat, almost empty.
Flat, empty.
Yeah, without much vibration is the phrase used. It perceives white flags, which it interprets as symbols of peace, but not much else. Not a lot of energetic charge perceived there.
Ah, okay. Let's look ahead then, based on this source material. The next conclave, the process for selecting the new pope. How is that perceived?
Oh, that's perceived with heavy energy and significantly much esoteric influence and outright manipulation.
Manipulation from where?
From non-physical sources, according to the transcript, metaphysical or esoteric consciousnesses.
What kind of manipulation does the source detail? How does it work?
It describes a specific targeting of the perceived mental bodies of the cardinals or whoever is involved in the conclave.
Okay.
It says their mental bodies will essentially boil.
Boy.
Yeah, be overstimulated by manipulative influences from these other consciousnesses.
And why? What's the perceived goal of this manipulation, according to the source?
The perceived purpose is to stop their sexual bodies from activating.
Sexual bodies. What does that mean in this context?
Well, the source explains that within this framework, the sexual body is perceived as allowing for, well, an opening to a kind of opening of consciousness.
An opening of consciousness.
Yeah, it encourages questioning, a desire for learning or knowledge, things that would bring mental clarification. And the manipulating entities the source perceives want to avoid that clarity.
Why?
To make sure the participants select the right person right for them, the manipulating entities. The overall perception is of the cardinals being handled like puppets, though it also mentions potential rebounds, like unintended side effects.
Is there anyone in the conclave, according to the source, who might resist this or see through it?
Yes, the source does describe one specific figure, a man who's relatively new within the church hierarchy. He's perceived as 100% human, genetically speaking, though still influenced like the others.
And what's different about him?
He's perceived as being somewhat aware of these esoteric stakes, the manipulations happening, and he's apparently trying, in this perceived reality, to bring some clarity, to maybe even deconstruct the system.
Can he succeed? What's his potential impact?
The source suggests he might initiate a shock, a moment of disruption, but it would immediately be taken back in hand, essentially quashed by the group's power dynamics and those external influences.
Why? Why wouldn't he succeed?
He's described as being too alone, not enough support, and maybe not conscious enough of all these stakes yet to really change the system fundamentally.
So what does the source perceive about the next pope specifically? Who gets chosen?
The description given is of an African man, perceived as being tall with a gentle face and not too old.
Okay. And any unusual characteristics perceived, like the DNA mentioned earlier.
Yes, interestingly, similar to the description of Pope Francis, his perceived DNA is described as being a mix of reptilian and human.
Another mix.
Right.
Okay. The source also gave a glimpse further out, didn't it? What about the Vatican in, say, 30 years from the session date, around 2055?
Yeah, that perception is quite stark. The words used are fire, incendies, which means large fire screams suffering. It's described quite bluntly in the transcript as the hell they promise.
Yeah, that's grim.
It is. But it's important to add, as the source itself does, that this is perceived as just one possible timeline, not necessarily the definite future.
Right, one potential future path. Before we wrap this up, did the source perceive any shorter-term changes, maybe looking ahead just a year from the session, towards April 2026?
Yes, it did perceive something for around that time frame, that some high-ranking individuals within the church start becoming aware of these perceived manipulations.
And what do they do?
They start leaving the church. This internal agitation, this departure of key figures, is perceived as beginning to destabilize that house of cards from the inside.
Will this be public?
The source suggests it might not be widely publicized initially, but it will fragile the power structure internally, and it could lead to lawsuits, which are perceived as being related to money.
Internal issues around money, potentially leading to legal action. Okay.
Yeah, weakening the structure from within.
Well, this deep dive has certainly taken us on a unique journey, wouldn't you say? Exploring these perceptions from this very specific and, yes, unconventional source material.
Absolutely. We've really just relayed what this particular transcript conveys, offering this single, quite distinct lens on these major topics.
Exactly. It's a report based solely on the content of the source provided to us. It offers a framework, a set of perceptions, nothing more, nothing less.
Right. So thinking about everything we've just unpacked from this source, the layers of perceived reality, the physical, the metaphysical influences, this idea of energy and information being perhaps strategically managed on a global scale.
Yeah.
It raises some big questions, doesn't it? What does it mean for our understanding of, say, collective consciousness or the nature of belief itself when information like this, from a source claiming these kinds of perceptions, even exists?
How do we process these descriptions that seem so far removed from everyday experience, especially when they concern powerful institutions and figures? It's definitely something to consider, based purely on exploring the content of this source material.